Number 9. A few months before the 9/11 attacks in 2001, 6 men in Buffalo, New York were accused of attending a terrorist training camp, and afterwards they allegedly traveled to the western part of the state in order to recruit young men. Known as the Lackawanna Six, they were ultimately convicted of providing material support to Al-Qaeda. In 2003, 2 men posing as TV producers lured 28-year-old Abdul A.K. Alamontaser into a limousine, claiming they wanted to interview him. Once he was in the car, one of the men struck him in the head. They kidnapped him at gunpoint and took him to a local auto garage where they tortured Alamontaser with a stun gun. The suspects then called the man's friend, a brother of one of the Lackawanna Six, who had also recently won a large lawsuit settlement, and demanded that he pay a $1 million ransom. The friend dialed 911, and the FBI got involved in the case. After negotiating the ransom down to $93,000, the FBI had the friend arrange for the suspects to pick up the money. Authorities identified 30-year-old Brett Bigelow as the mastermind of the crime, and 27-year-old Timothy Fisher, a bouncer at a local bar, as the lookout. The men were consequently charged with extortion. Bigelow was sentenced to more than 15 years in federal prison, and Fisher received a sentence of more than 9 years. At his trial, Bigelow apologized but said he felt the punishment was excessive. Fisher seemed more remorseful and tearfully admitted that he had no excuse for his actions. Number 8. Mark Schatzley. British heiress Anna Reid met her German boyfriend, a bouncer named Mark Schatzley, in Thailand in early 2019. The 22-year-old spent tens of thousands of dollars on her new beau during their time together, footing the bills for 5-star accommodations, dinners, clothing, and other gifts. Just 2 months later, Schatzley frantically pleaded with employees at a luxury hotel in Switzerland to dial 911 because Anna had turned blue. By the time paramedics arrived, she was dead. Schatzley claimed he accidentally suffocated her during a kinky choking game, and he maintained this story when he went on trial for murder. The court heard how Schatzley told Anna that he ran a company when he was actually unemployed, broke, in debt to ex-girlfriends, and owed child support for his 2 kids. Prosecutors argued that Schatzley killed Anna because she threatened to leave him after being warned by a third party that he was using her for her money. He allegedly hid her credit card in the ceiling of an elevator so he could use it after she died. Schatzley claimed he hid the card as a joke and that Anna showed none of the typical signs of distress that one could expect to find when a person dies from asphyxiation. This was the reason he gave as to why he didn't notice anything was wrong until it was too late. But the jury sided with the prosecution's allegations that he was desperate to maintain his recently upgraded lifestyle, and they found Schatzley guilty of Anna's murder. In the end, he was sentenced to serve 18 years in prison. Number 7. Daryl Littlejohn. College student Shania Woodard was walking home from a class in Queens, New York one day in 2005 when a man posing as a law enforcement officer handcuffed her and forced her into a van. She initially cooperated, but when she saw the van's messy interior, she knew it wasn't a police vehicle. The first time Woodard tried to escape, her kidnapper pulled the van over and struck her on the head. On her second try, she managed to open the vehicle's door and tumbled out onto the pavement. She then ran to a nearby house for help. However, the suspect initially avoided being caught and the case went unsolved. In early 2006, the strangled body of a college student named Emmett St. Julian was found in a remote part of Brooklyn. In tracing her last movements, detectives learned that a bouncer had escorted her out of a Manhattan bar when she refused to leave after last call. The bouncer, a man in his 40s named Daryl Littlejohn, said that he and St. Julian went their separate ways after he walked her out of the building. But phone records put him at the scene where her body was dumped, and carpet fibers found on St. Julian's body matched the carpet in Littlejohn's apartment. DNA evidence also connected him to the crime, and he was subsequently charged with murder. While watching TV coverage of the case, Shania Woodard suspected that Littlejohn was her kidnapper. Investigators looked into it and they ended up charging him for that crime as well. In the end, Littlejohn was sentenced to 25 years to life for abducting Woodard, and he received a life sentence without parole for St. Julian's murder. Number 6. Alvaro Larama. In 2022, 23-year-old Marine Daniel Martinez was celebrating St. Patrick's Day at a bar in Boston, Massachusetts with some friends when a bouncer, Alvaro Larama, told a group member to stop vaping indoors. However, the young woman continued to vape and was consequently escorted out of the bar. Martinez and another friend finished their drinks and left to join the woman who had been kicked out. They tried going back to the bar, but Larama denied them entry due to the vaping incident, and the parties exchanged heated words. Minutes later, the police arrived at the scene to find Martinez on the ground with a life-threatening stab wound. Prosecutors claimed that surveillance footage shows Larama running after the man as he walks away from the bar. The two engaged in a struggle, and it ended fatally for Martinez, who could be seen in the video trying to defend himself. Authorities charged Larama with murder. At the time, he was already facing charges for allegedly joining in a fight while working at a neighboring bar just 2 weeks earlier. Bartender Alicia Dumire was also accused of accessory after the fact based on surveillance video that appears to show her throwing Larama's bloody clothes in the garbage, but she claims she knew nothing of the stabbing at the time. A lawyer representing the owners of the bar that hired Larama admitted they didn't run a background check on him and had no idea he was carrying a weapon. Martinez's family announced they plan to file a civil lawsuit against the business for failing to thoroughly vet the bouncer. In the meantime, Larama remains behind bars without bail. Number 5. Bouncer bears it all. During the summer of 2022, a half-naked bouncer was captured on camera with a bar patron in the city of Sevastopol in Russia's Crimea region. Footage showed the pair on top of the bar, shamelessly engaging in sexual activity while a cheering crowd looked on. They displayed several different inappropriate acts that are typically done in private and paid no attention to the blaring music or their audience. At one point during the video, a man visiting the bar can be seen approaching the couple for a close-up while recording them with his phone. Under the law, these types of displays are punishable by a small fine and a 15-day jail sentence. Once police found out about the crime, they began investigating and soon identified a 32-year-old civilian as the bouncer in the X-rated footage. Shortly after the story made international news headlines, Russian authorities confirmed that they had arrested the man and that he had been in administrative detention for 2 weeks. However, they hadn't yet identified and apprehended the woman. The war-torn Crimea region used to be a part of the Ukraine, but was annexed by Russia in 2014. Just hours after the public romp, a series of explosions rocked a nearby military base, but authorities were still determined enough to maintain law and order to take the nightclub incident seriously and told the public that they were actively investigating the case in an effort to hold the female party responsible. At number 4, Kenneth Fry. When 41-year-old Eric Pope got a little too intoxicated at a Philadelphia sports bar one night in 2022, a bouncer escorted him outside. Just a few minutes later, he was laying on a nearby sidewalk in a clear need of medical help. Surveillance footage reportedly shows the bouncer punching Pope in the street and knocking him unconscious. According to police, more bouncers then moved Pope over to the sidewalk, where a crowd of curious onlookers gathered. Several minutes later, he was rushed to the hospital where he died a week later. The suspect, 24-year-old Kenneth Fry, turned himself into police and was charged with third-degree murder. If convicted, he could serve up to 20 years in prison. Fry was employed through a company called Mainline Private Security. Sources told Fox 29 that in the month leading up to the incident, police had received at least 5 calls about problems with the company's bouncers. In October of 2022, 6 months after Pope's death, another Mainline employee was charged with allegedly attacking a bar patron who continues to struggle with long-term injuries to this day. The victim told CBS News that the bouncer dragged him outside of a bar by the neck, choked him until he was unconscious, and slammed him to the ground. The incident was reportedly captured on surveillance footage. Authorities charged the bouncer, Omar Clark, with recklessly endangering another person as well as strangulation. A lawsuit discovered by CBS alleges that bouncers employed by Mainline attacked another man that same night, leaving him with a concussion, a fractured tooth, and a shoulder injury that required surgery. The continued incidents involving the company's workers have sparked calls for changes in its policies and practices. Number 3. David Cruz. While working as a bouncer at a sports bar in Holbrook, Long Island in 2022, David Cruz got into a verbal altercation with a 32-year-old patron named Jake Scott. It ended with Cruz allegedly assaulting Scott, who was taken to the hospital with brain bleeding and a skull fracture. Doctors placed the victim in a medically induced coma and tried to save his life, but he died from his injuries 11 days later. Cruz was initially arrested for assault, but when Scott passed away, the charge was upgraded to manslaughter. Prosecutors claimed that the suspect repeatedly tried to lure Scott away from the bar's security cameras. When it didn't work, Cruz went to his car, put his hat and another item inside, and went back into the bar. He then allegedly dragged a chair over to the surveillance camera and covered it with his shirt. However, a security camera at a nearby business captured what happened next. According to authorities, the victim saw Cruz coming and tried to get up out of his seat, but was met with a punch. Scott reportedly fell to the sidewalk while his attacker, who weighs around 270 pounds, got on top of him and continued to strike him repeatedly. According to a spokesman for District Attorney Raymond Tierney, Scott was unconscious by the time the suspect grabbed him by the shirt and yelled at him to get up. The spokesperson also said that when Cruz realized the victim was unresponsive, he dropped him back to the ground and punched him one last time before walking away. Cruz is required to wear an ankle monitor at the moment, but remains free without bail pending the outcome of the case due to New York State's notoriously weak bail laws. News 12 Long Island reported that the judge apologized to Scott's family and said that under the law he had no choice but to continue the suspect's supervised release even after the charge was upgraded to manslaughter. Number 2. Nojan Coffey. In the early morning hours one day in 2020, a fight broke out at a bar in Manchester, England, and soon spilled out onto the street. 33-year-old Emmanuel Simon inserted himself into the brawl in an attempt to act as a peacemaker. During the disagreement, someone punched Simon in the head, causing him to immediately fall unconscious. Unfortunately, Simon never regained consciousness, and he died in the hospital 2 weeks later. Investigators released surveillance footage from the night of the incident, hoping members of the public would come forward and identify the suspect. That same day, the bar's bouncer Nojan Coffey turned himself into law enforcement and was charged with murder. As a result, he was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months in jail. Simon had moved to England from Eritrea, Africa, to attend medical school. He was at a wedding celebration earlier that night before he headed to the bar for drinks. Prosecutors claimed that he had his hands up in a peaceful gesture when Coffey punched him. Coffey expressed deep remorse for the incident, but he was also in court on unrelated allegations of violence. In his other criminal case, he was accused of denying 2 men entry to a lap dancing bar, and he allegedly punched one of them in the face and broke his jaw. There was no medical evidence to support the claim, but Coffey pleaded guilty to the charge and received an additional 3 months tacked on to his murder sentence. And at number 1, Hayden Robert Bruce Summers. After being kicked out of a bar in Darwin, Australia in 2021, U.S. Marine Glenn Thomason got into a confrontation with the bouncer, 34-year-old Hayden Robert Bruce Summers. Thomason reportedly wasn't told why he was being removed from the bar and was understandably upset. Witnesses would later report hearing him threatening to kill Summers and calling himself a trained killer. Surveillance footage captured the moment Summers punched Thomason, who fell backward and smacked his head against the ground. Thomason survived but faced a long road to recovery, which involved having part of his skull removed and undergoing rehabilitation. During his trial for criminal charges stemming from the incident, Summers claimed that the victim made him feel threatened and that he acted in self-defense. His lawyers pointed out that he had 15 years of experience in the security industry and was a skilled crowd controller. They argued that Summers tried to de-escalate the situation before he struck Thomason. But the jury was unconvinced and found Summers guilty of unlawfully causing serious harm. As a result, he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Would you rather be denied entry to a bar with no explanation while the rest of your group gets in, or have an entire cocktail spilled into your purse during a night out? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.